Testing.
Okay, I'll take this one. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Ryan Latanzio. I'm an editor for IndieWire, and appreciate you all staying for the end of the screening of Wildcat tonight because we have the director and co-writer Ethan Hawke with us.
Hey. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Hello, Ethan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, glad to be here. I'm wondering, with this movie, what is your relationship to Flannery O'Connor? Like, how did you discover her as a writer?
Well, all right. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. It was 1980. My mother was selling college textbooks, and she used to drive around all these different universities. And Miss O'Connor is quite popular down there, and she discovered her and then went to her house and started reading them and started telling me about how great she was. And you know, when you're a kid, I thought Flannery O'Connor was as popular as Star Wars because that is just my mother talked about it all the time. And so I thought she was the most famous author in the world because the one my mom talked about all the time. And as I got older, she kept giving it to me because I kept getting more and more interested in kind of the usual suspects of knucklehead macho male authors. And she kept saying, read Flannery O'Connor. And she was always breathtaking. And I found it really mysterious, the relationship between the picture on the back jacket and the stories I was reading. Because in the back jacket, you'd often see this picture of this horn-rimmed glasses, young woman in crutches, and she looks like a poor Emily Dickinson character or Louisa May Alcott or something. And then the stories seemed like Charles Bukowski, you know? They were just utter madness. And I was, who is this woman? Then you cut to 20 or so years later, and my daughter discovered Flannery. Maya was about 16 or 17, and her high school English teacher gave it to her, and she fell in love with it. And then on her own, she found the prayer journal, and she shared that with me. Maya gave me the prayer journal. And I think Maya was hypnotized by that. The journal is kind of her letters to God, age 18 to 21, 22. And she was really wrestling with what are the right manifestations of ambition. And that she wanted to be a great writer. And she wanted to be a good Christian. And how to reconcile humility with this aspirational for excellence. And what do you want to be excellent for? For other people to think you're fabulous, to be important? Or do you believe that art could be in service of others? Is that hubris? She was really, really struggling with, and I think it's particularly acute for young women. Men are often encouraged to be ambitious, and women are often, told that that's kind of ugly or something. And Flannery was struggling with that, and Maya was struggling with it. And Maya ended up creating out of the prayer journal a monologue that she used to audition for theater schools. And it was really beautiful. And it was the first time I really kind of took in what a serious young artist Maya was, watching her work on that monologue. And as Stranger Things started to blow up and she started to kind of ask herself about how to have more agency in her own work, she went out and got the rights to Flannery O'Connor stories and life rights and things like that. She partnered up with the man who did own the rights. And then she approached me with the job. She said, I think we should make a movie about Flannery O'Connor. And I was like, that woman never did anything her whole life but write and feed chickens. What's the movie in that? And Maya said she knew what I had been struggling with, which was that I had just turned 50 and was profoundly disappointed in myself that a lot of the questions that I'd been asking myself as a young man, questions about faith, inner life, service, community, art, I was just disappointed in myself that I seemed to have left all those big questions at the door at first base in my early 20s. And then I had this realization that perhaps creativity is an act of worship, and perhaps my life has been had a faith dynamic to it through performance. That in a lot of ways, performance is an act of faith. And I was feeling better about that. And Maya said to me, like, isn't that where Flannery's faith is most beautifully manifest, is in her art and her aspiration for excellence? Because how she answered the question about ambition was that through the pursuit of excellence, true excellence, you are fully actualizing yourself. Whatever, architecture, building, teaching, whatever you do, when you do it to the best of your ability and you love doing it, you are, to use her words, you're doing God's will. You are doing what you are here to do if you do it to the best of your ability. It's a Thomas Aquinas idea, really. And so Maya basically was saying, couldn't we use Flannery to talk about this personal feelings that you have about imagination and reality and faith? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. Now, it's not the most commercial idea in the world, but we went with it. And I started building this movie.
Well, can you talk a bit about the process of directing your daughter in a movie? I mean, it must be, I don't know if destabilizing is the right word, but it's like, here's someone that you already spend a lot of time with, just in your personal life, and then here you are, like, is there a blurring of the lines between getting off the set and then going home? Not that you necessarily live together, she's an adult, but, you're still in contact.
We lived together while we made the movie, and it was so beautiful to have her back. And have it be her choice. No, what's that question? If you love something, for it free, and that's what happens when you raise a kid. You raise them, and they go away. And then this bird decided to fly back and say, hey, I saw you. Let's work together. It was a real great compliment, and one I didn't take lightly. And the truth of the matter is that Maya and I, like a lot of fathers, and we have a lot of fault lines. We have a lot of things that are difficult. But making things together, wow, that's cool. What's that, the subway? Right.
I hope so.
Making things together is our safe space. This is a kid, a lot of kids, when you say, do you want to go to a museum? They're like, oh my God. Maya would go, oh, there's a great exhibit at the MoMA. She loved doing that. She loved going to hear music. She would love nothing more than to sit down and break down a short story and talk about it at the table. The thing that's the most challenging about working with her is releasing the movie and having a public face to it. Like, hey, we made a movie together, come see it. That feels awkward because it's somehow commercializing something that is really sacred. To me, but to anybody with your relationship to your kids or your parents, it's private, and but we made art with it, and it was so fun, and it did feel like it was not on a fault line. That's our safe place, and the thing that's hard is trying to turn it into selling it. That's awkward and feels crass somehow, but the making of it was so much fun to work with her. And she has so many ideas, and to work on a subject matter that's as dangerous as this, faith and imagination, these are dangerous subject matters. If we were all out to dinner together, and I said, hey, you guys, I really want to talk about God, right? Half of the people in here would definitely go to the bathroom. Right, or like, what, I'm going to do the dishes. It's something a lot of us think about privately, but when we talk about it publicly, there's a real concern that we're going to be proselytized to, we're going to be tried to be convinced to believe something other than we do. And one of the magic acts of Flannery O'Connor's life is to use her faith to deepen herself and to deepen her view of the world and just make beautiful art with it and not try to convince you that she knows what your relationship to the divine is like. She doesn't. She's not so arrogant as to think that she's responsible for that, but she can share what she's learned. And that's beautiful. And I found it to be incredibly rich subject matter.
Well, as I understand, there was a moment where you debated walking away from the project or how to continue with it once you sort of realized sort of the bigotry in her personal correspondences and maybe even in her fiction. Can you talk about that?
Well, the best of herself is pretty manifest in her fiction. You know, like my line about her is I think Flannery O'Connor is like our country, which is that she's a recovering racist. We're a racist country, and she was born and bred in the Jim Crow South. She was trapped in a home with a racist mother. She was fed all this doctrine. And she, as Toni Morrison and Alice Walker have said, she saw white hypocrisy better than almost anybody writing. I mean, she was writing in opposition to Margaret Mitchell. She was, Alice Walker has my favorite line, which is, "There's an scent of magnolia in the air," you know. She didn't try to write about what it was like to be oppressed. She had no idea. She wrote about what she knew, and what she knew was a lot of ugliness. Now, she was not saying that that ugliness was not present in her sometimes. I think she learned what she was writing about through experience. And, you know, unfortunately, she died really young. She died in 1964, age of 39, having been terribly sick for the last 15 years of her life. So she didn't have a lot of the exposure that I think had she had, who she could have evolved into. But I tried to let her speak for herself. You know, one of my favorite lines of hers is, "The truth doesn't change according to your ability to stomach it." She just wrote what she knew, and you can deal with that as you will. She's not trying to make the world right by her writing. She's just trying to tell her stories.
My favorite scene of the movie is this sort of reimagination or recreation of one of her stories, Good Country People, in which Cooper Hoffman plays a sort of prostheses fetishist posing as a Bible salesman who is not quite that person. And you have really spectacular performances from both Cooper and from Maya Hawke. Can you talk a little bit about that day on the set, particularly around there's like a very long take in this barn that just unfolds very beautifully?
Well, for me, it was magical, you know. And for Laura, you know, I've known Laura longer than I've known Maya.
That's right. You two are longtime friends from a Chekhov play.
I made my Broadway debut with Laura when I was 21 years old. And, you know, 5-6 years before I met Maya. And so Laura and I have been, you know, Laura made Savages with Phil Hoffman, and I made Before the Devil Knows You're Dead with Phil Hoffman. We all grew up here in this movie theater, you know, watching movies together. And to watch Maya and Cooper attack this story, I mean, they were ferocious. You know, I love the way Cooper thought about his character and tried to make sense out of him and tried to understand him, tried to not judge him, tried to play him like, who's a guy that's gonna sprint off across the moon, enjoy having stolen a wooden leg? How can I understand him? In Maya, you know, that scene in Flannery's letters, she talks about that as that story was her first attempt at autobiography, right? You know, his most personal fiction. And so we put that at the end after the scene with Liam, which is about her starting to accept her situation. And he said that scene ends with, "Now's the time for a proper confession." And in my mind's eye, that story is her real confession. Sometimes I don't believe in God. Sometimes my faith is thin. Sometimes I look down on everyone else. I think I'm smarter than everybody else. I've changed, you know, I was given the name Joy, and I changed it to Holga. You know, like it's a very scathing self-portrait, and she gets played because the world's even meaner and crueler than she is. And that's her confession. It's brutal, but it was beautiful for Laura and I to watch this younger generation of people falling in love with what we do and turning their artistry onto uncomfortable, complicated, weird people, which is part of the job of the actor, is to put yourself in these situations. One funny thing I like to say, I actually saw this on some Twitter thing the other day, is like imagine if there was a person running for president who was selling Bibles on the side to get money to pay off a porn star. Sounds like a Flannery O'Connor short story. And I thought, ha ha, Flannery at it again.
Well, what would be a Flannery O'Connor short story that you would recommend?
My joke about Flannery O'Connor is she's the greatest writer I would never recommend. Because they're just so upsetting. They really are. Some you read them. Part of why I guess I got hooked into making the movie is you read them and they're very upsetting, and you don't know what they're about. And that poor guy getting Jesus tattooed in his back, and then he's crying, and what is that saying? And then your brain goes, I know it's saying something. I feel. Kind of like I don't understand a Miles Davis solo, but I feel that he does. I feel it's mathematically correct. I know it is. And I feel that way about her work. And then you start thinking about it, how we all reject the inner Christ and all of, your brain starts doing it, and then you feel like you have to read it again. And then you do read it again, and then you start to see the wit. And then you start, they're very multi-layered, and but everybody's entrance place as a good man is hard to find, which has the greatest line in it in all of fiction, I think, is she would have been a good woman if there'd been somebody there to shoot her every day of her life. It's just she just has these one-liners constantly. But that would be the great first starting place.
That was my starting place as well. And, obviously she preferred the dark underside of life. It's like when she's talking to Liam Neeson at The Priest, and she's like, hell seems like a much better alternative than the other afterlife that you're offering me.
That one's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
It's weird how our brains, I can imagine hell. Heaven? Nah, it doesn't make any sense. Virtually all the dialogue in the movie is curated. It's curated from her letters, her essays, her short stories. So all those lines are hers. That people see the church as a poor man's insurance company. One of the things I challenged myself to do, and Shelby Gaines, who wrote the movie with me, is we tried to read what she was reading, and she read far out people, man. She was a wild thinker, and it was really inspiring to read. We don't read enough. It's fascinating. And once you start reading what she was reading, you start seeing how she's using it, and it's beautiful. That line, everything rises must converge, is taken from a Jesuit philosopher, Pierre de Teilhard, who was far out. I highly recommend. Anyway, I don't need to get into him. But anyway, he was really interesting, and so was she, obviously.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Ethan.
Before we go, can I say one thing?
Yes, no, please.
I never get to do this.
I got one question. Ethan Hawke, you're not credited as an actor in this movie, but you are the voice of the train conductor. Yes or no?
True. Very well. I wanted to say one thing that you never get to say as a director. I had an assistant who works with me on this movie. His name is Jimmy B. And this guy was such a great resource. He helped me with every aspect of this film, and his parents are here tonight, and I want them to know what an amazing young man he is. All right? All right. Thank you guys for spending your Friday night with us.
Thank you. And the last thing I'll say is that this Sunday at the AMC Lincoln Square, there are still tickets for a screening of the movie at 2:30, where Laura Linney will join for a Q&A as well.
Oh, tell your friends. We need your help. Appreciate it if you think it's interesting.
Thank you.
All right.